So we need everybody to be able to grasp whatever information and whatever opportunity there is to go back and implement something that's going to start addressing these issues. Again, I have to say, we are the change agents, not the kids. We're the change agents. So once we make the changes, the kids will make the changes, but it starts with us. So to get us rolling, we're going to start with talking about staff development. Joseph does, he's in charge of this whole human resource thing, so he certainly knows about staff personnel and hiring practices that need to be enforced. So let's start with Joseph, and then we'll go into Dr. Lesibu, and she'll talk about just diversity and staff development issues from the State Department. And then we want to hear from Jackie and Shadia on debiasing and, well, they have excellent presentations, so you're here. So I'm going to turn it over to Joseph.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
First of all, like I said, I'm very thankful to be here. When I got the phone call, I was very excited. I'm focusing in on two things this morning. How do you focus on diversity during the hiring process, and a process that evolved in New Rochelle as a result of me being given that mandate? And secondly, what's known as Pathways to Diversity, the committee that we formed, as well as a conference that we held. When I first took this position back in July of 2013, we had a superintendent who was clear that diversity was important. We had an incoming superintendent who shared that same perspective. And you have to say, they didn't have to tell me twice, because as a former principal and a resident of New Rochelle, having moved to New Rochelle for its diversity, this was something that was a part of my mindset when I first took the position anyway. So I'm going to start by asking you 4 rhetorical questions, and I'm going to do something I hate to do, ask a question and then answer the question. So the first question that I have for you is, does your school district have a diversity policy? Your school district, from what I understand, is not required to have a diversity policy. And if it does not have one, that really means that you're not given direction from the Board of Education in terms of what diversity means. That being the case, if you begin to move in the direction of hiring a diverse staff, people can look at you sort of askew because you have not gotten your marching orders from the Board of Education. The best case scenario is that the board has a policy and the superintendent blesses that policy as well. Then you can move forward because all of the major stakeholders have put forward that diversity is of the utmost importance. The second question that I have is a simple one. Have you read your district's diversity policy, if one actually exists? If you've not read that, you're ill-informed because you don't know what the perspective is of your school district as it relates to diversity. And the third piece is, how is your district's diversity policy actually operationalized? If you have one, but you don't know exactly how that's being put into play in your school district, that policy is one of two things. It's either dormant or it's dead. So if it's either one of those two things, you might as well not have a diversity policy. And the fourth question that I have is, do all school and district leaders who participate in the hiring process have an awareness of your district's diversity policy? If one exists and they're not aware of it, those who are on the front lines of hiring, it would be impossible to have the result be a more diversified teaching staff because they're not been privy to the direction that the district is taking. The place where I started in New Rochelle was with the diversity policy. I sent out an email that basically included the directive that I was given from the superintendent of schools with an attachment that was the district's diversity policy. And in that email, I suggested that this needs to serve as the foundation on which all decision-making is occurring in the school district during the hiring process. And I did this in April before the budget actually passed, because that is the point at which we knew what the retirements would be and what the hiring process would look like. And I want to read to you just one small portion of our district's diversity policy. I think you're going from that our district has a serious focus on diversity. And by the way, the policy was written in 1988 but revised in 2012, so it's recent in everyone's mind. It reads, the Board of Education believes that diversity is the cornerstone of an academically rich environment and recognizes the importance of workforce diversity as an integral part of the educational experience. For students to respect and value diversity, they must experience adult workers, that's teachers, lunch monitors, custodial staff, who are reflective of the varied cultures and backgrounds that make up our community and our nation. I would have to say kudos to all of our administrators, those that are directly involved in the hiring process and those that are indirectly involved in the hiring process, because there was a strong sense of embracement. As a result, well, there were some questions that were asked. One of the first questions was, how do you identify candidates of color who can diversify the workforce based upon what's on their resumes? What I did at this point is I told them that they should look for organizations such as historically black sororities and fraternities. Hindsight being what it is, this year I will send them that list, but we have talented administrators and I'm sure they Googled that list anyway. I told them to look for affiliations with programs that actually, or programs that actually have the ethnicity written within its title. For example, NAPSI, the National Association of Black School Educators, or ALAS, the Association for Latino Administrators. I told them to look for surnames, although that's not completely foolproof because people marry interracially and within various cultures, and first names help as well. I'll give you an example. If you come across a resume of someone by the name of Shaniqua Jenkins, one would probably give consideration that that person is of African American descent. Juan Lopez, one can assume perhaps that that person is of Latino or Hispanic descent. Also, you can look for the names of historically black colleges and universities. This year as well, I'll be sending out a list of all those as well. One of the most effective ways, for those who are really proactive, is by word of mouth. Within your networks, within your close nesting circle, or outside of that, you simply make a statement. I'm looking for talented educators who can diversify the workforce. Who do you know? Who do you know that would be interested in exploring this as a possibility? And one thing that's great about New Rochelle is our close proximity to New York City. So we're able to take advantage of those who are seeking to have a higher salary and working conditions. So I constantly attempt to reach into New York City, especially with the mindset that we're looking to diversify our workforce. I also took the opportunity to speak to all the clergy that I can make contact with that represent diversity throughout New Rochelle. I asked them to make announcements to their congregation when they have them all there at Sunday service. So ultimately speaking, what we wanted to do was increase the presence of diversity within our candidate pool. So after sending this out, I would ask questions about the level 1, 2, and 3 interview process levels. The first level is where you just collect all the resumes and you decide who's going to meet the committee at the building level. The second level is who's going to be selected, maybe a group of 5 or 6, to do demo lessons. And the third level is where I insist that for every position I'm sent 3 candidates so I can actually lay my eyes on who those individuals are who are coming to that final level. So with the first level, my question is, how many of those individuals with those resumes that the committee first met with represented people of color? Same question at level 2. How many of those who advanced to the demo lesson represented diversity as well? And I'm able to lay my eyes on those who are at level 3. When you're hiring 46 people in one hiring season, if you multiply 3 times 46, you get 138. So that's 138 interviews that I sat through, but I felt it was necessary to do that so I could be really clear of the picture of the pool of candidates from level 1 through level 3. So as it was stated earlier, the result of that evolution of that process was we hired 46 people, 18 of whom were people of color, which is about 40%. And there is a similar school district in terms of demographics that over this hiring season, there were 30 positions that were available and resulted in only 1 being hired. And I'm willing to say that those who weren't hired in that school district were hired in your shop. 2 years prior to taking this position, I was a principal in a district and the president of the union. So I found myself at all the school board members. I'm transitioning now to Pathways to Diversity. And at this meeting, there was a community activist slash firefighter slash security officer by the name of Mark McLean, who basically was holding the district's feet to the fire about the newly revised diversity policy. He wanted to know basically how is this policy being operationalized? Is it actionable in our school districts? And he wanted to know if there was basically a one-to-one match, demographically speaking, of the staff to the demographics of the student population. That gave rise to the leaders of our district believing that he was speaking about quotas. Upon hearing that perspective and having that perspective, ears were closed, eyes were shut, and there was no movement until I took this position. When you look at what are the best practices, when you look at the ISLIC standards, when you look at the multi-dimensional professional performance review for leadership, you find that collegiality is important. You find that collaboration is important, and including the community. So it was incumbent upon me to meet with this gentleman who had more than a grain of a good idea. He had an excellent idea. The theme of this Pathways to Diversity conference was to invite people from the private sector and the public sector who had a proven track record of diversifying their workforce, establish a panel, invite those who are involved in the hiring process to hear from me and incorporate that into how we move forward with our hiring process. We were not as successful in having people from the private sector come to us. We were really ambitious. We invited the president of American Express, who actually lives in New Rochelle. It resulted in us having 4 dynamic educators who served as part of the panel. We had a gentleman by the name of Sandra, who is a former assistant superintendent in New Rochelle, in New York City Schools, presently the principal of DeWitt Clinton High School. We had Ferdinand Fuentes, who is the director of educational options in Boston Public Schools. And if you want to implement something like this in your school district, it's all about connections. The way I connected with Freddie Fuentes is by making a presentation at the College of New Rochelle. In the audience were 2 vice presidents of Scholastic Incorporated. They thought this was a good idea, and they began to reach out in their network, and we were able to connect with this gentleman. Another person was Dr. David Banks, who is the CEO and founder of Eagle Academies, which is a school for African-American males, a network of schools for African-American males in New York City. And Dr. Betty Perkins, who is the founder and CEO of Today's Students and Tomorrow's Teachers. We formed a committee that brainstormed what we were going to be able to do. And again, in the spirit of collaboration and collegiality, our committee was comprised of 2 school board members, 3 community members, one of whom was a parent, 1 district level communication, myself, and I'm also a parent in the school district, and 2 administrators at the building level, Mr. Reggie Richardson, who's the principal of the high school, who's here with us today. He was one of those committee members. We asked these panelists a series of several questions, and 4 of those questions were matched individually with each of the panelists, and we asked them to add value to those questions, and the other 3 they answered in general. And those who were in attendance were by invitation only, because when you talk about diversity, you're talking about race, ethnicity, gender, and that often causes discomfort. That often brings out people who have political agendas, and we didn't know whether or not people would take this as an advantage to bring political agendas. So we invited all the administrators from the school district, and practically everyone to a person showed up. We invited the city officials from New Rochelle. We invited the associates of the panelists, and members of the general public did show up, and they were not turned away. As a result of the conference, we were able to garner that there is a pipeline issue. People of color are not going into education. Particularly African-American males do not view themselves as teachers. So in order to address that pipeline issue, we met with Dr. Betty Perkins, and the superintendent of schools has allocated $30,000 over the course of the next 3 years in order to bring that program to our schools. So there's something concrete that we were able to get from that. sidebar conversations led us to understand that a major issue that can arise when you don't have high levels of diversity is that those that are serving as instructors of our students may not know them as well as they should, and they find themselves engaged in ways that cause difficulties for our students. Therefore, we're looking for professional development for cultural competence. And lastly, it's clear that we need to continue to be proactive in our search for candidates and continue to outreach. I gave you a handout where I included our diversity policy. You can use this to compare it to your district diversity policy. I happen to think this is a great policy. I happen to think that it's pretty much current at this particular time. Also, in the event that you were seeking to do something like this in your school district, I have the 5 questions, actually, I thought it was 7 or 5 questions that were asked of the panelists. And lastly, the letter of invitation that we sent to people who were willing to be a part of our panel. This was the letter of invitation. So that's basically what we've done. And we did have success last year, and I'm hoping to grow and improve the success based upon pathways of diversity.
I think since Joseph sort of started with you, Michelle, what we do is we'll go to White Plains. So we'll go to Jackie and let Jackie talk about some of the work that she's done, and then we'll go back to Dr. Lesibu and Shadia. So Jacqueline, thank you very much.
Facilitator, she left, but these are the handouts.
We have someone that can come.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be able to share a collaborative initiative that I developed to help increase the number of African American teachers and administrators hired in White Plains City School District. And first, I'd like to acknowledge the incoming principal, Superintendent Mr. Connors in the back, who I had a lot of conversation with, and also supporting this initiative. I didn't know he was going to be in this workshop, but that's great. First of all, I was asked about the name of this, and I keep calling it the initiative. And I haven't come up with a better name, so as my terms of endearment, I'll just refer to it as the initiative. The initiative was to increase the recruitment, the interviewing and hiring in African Americans. So I'm thinking of making an acronym out of that maybe at some point. But anyway, primarily, White Plains always prided itself in being a diverse school district. However, that diversity was not reflective in the staff, especially the African American staff throughout the school district. And I'm not talking about just present. I'm talking about 30 years back when I had my children in schools and throughout their terms in high school. With the exception at the high school level, there was also very little African American teachers, and especially males, in the district. I also started, so I was always interested in this concern and what was going to be, how was it being handled. I spent many at the end of a school year terms talking to my principals about, well, what are we going to do? What's going to happen? And are you hiring any new African Americans for this upcoming school year? And I got conversation and dialogue, but nothing, permanent, nothing definitive. I was prompted to address this concern because in September 2013, I received from the Human Resources the ethnicity data for that year, 2013, and the total district of professional teachers and administrators was 656 for the City of White Plains School District, and only 65 of those were African Americans. Another reason, in 2013 for that upcoming school year, so it was between 2012 and 2013, there were 27 openings for positions of all levels and disciplines throughout the district. And in fact, there was a new school opening, a sixth grade academy opening upcoming school year. And of all those 27 openings, not one African American was hired. And I was just totally floored and disappointed the one African American that was starting this new academy, she was a transfer from an elementary to join that staff. So there was like actually two staff, a gym teacher and a social studies teacher that were joining that school year. And I was out, the final reason I started this initiative was around 2011, the former superintendent of schools would put out a newsletter, and in one of those letters of information, it was talking about the disproportionate number of African American males that were being suspended from schools. And I went to him because he had an open door kind of evening, afternoon, come meet with me. And I went to him and I said, well, what's happening? You know, what is the district planning to do about this? And I got, you know, answers that just weren't that concrete or definitive as far as I was concerned. And I proposed, I said, well, have you even looked into trying to bring in more African American males? You know, maybe that in itself will help us solve some of these difficulties or these suspensions. But anyway, he went on to another district. But anyway, I decided to address these concerns, and with the consulting and talking to the superintendent and director of human resources, we came up with an action plan. And what happened was, through OLAS, which is what most districts use, there's no indication on that application, online application, for what's your ethnicity. You know, so if you have, there is a question, and you can answer it if you want, but it's not going into the application to that school district. So they don't know, basically, if you're African American, Latino, etc. And so I said, since the district was using that as the system to use, the district was using that as a system to address applicants and get candidates for jobs, I said to him, there has to be a way that we can at least wean out and find out. And so it was agreed that any African American candidate that applied, they would submit the application, and then they can notify me, and then I would send forward their name on to Human Resources, and with the hope, and with not a guarantee, but with the hope of a possible pre-interview interview, and then there's a group interview, and then hopefully be hired. So I developed an email system, and and NASB was one of those where national education, black educators, I used their email listing as given permission by them, and I got a lot of referrals and a lot of extra referrals, and so I have a broad base of people now that I can contact. And in terms of what Joseph was saying, I also contacted a lot of churches. I went to churches and I got up and I told them about this system. And if you know candidates, what was so interesting though, people thought I was just there recruiting for any jobs. And you know, like my nephew wants a job, he needs a job, and I was like, you know, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to do this right now. Teachers, but it was good, and I got the support of the White Plains Ministers Alliance to use their churches as a platform. I also must mention, because you made mention of some things that in White Plains, I mean, that Rochelle does. There were past practices to diversify the staff, but there were job fairs, there were recruitments on college campuses, there were individuals who would be flown to some of the historical black universities to go for recruitment purposes, and that all kind of just died out, and it just wasn't, there was nothing in place. I just want to quickly just say, if you look at staff development in terms of this whole diversity, the success of it in the Hired Initiative in White Plains City School District would have an impact on staff development in many ways. A diverse staff will help improve professional development and working with African American children. It is hoped that through staff development, teachers will become more knowledgeable about cultures and how to work with children. They'll become more sensitive and just dispel some of the myths of that go around in terms of children, why children can't learn or why they're not learning. if we can bring in more African American teachers. We've had researchers like Billings, who wrote The Dream Keepers, and the way this morning, one of the presenters mentioned colorblindness, and Billings often, all throughout her books, she mentions people say, I don't see color. When I work with kids, I don't see color. Well, that's a misconception, because if you don't see color, you don't see me, and you don't see them, because they are of color. And you have to see them to recognize them as people. So there's research out there, cultural conflict in other people's children, cultural conflict in the classroom. Jawan, I can never say his name, so I'll say the last name, Kanjufu. He wrote The Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. These students, they all come up with collectively that students benefit from teachers of similar backgrounds. They say they allow for a better understanding of the African American students' culture, assimilation into the school system, etc. And how does this relate to reducing suspension? Well, in order to make effective changes, we have to learn about the cultural needs and the academic needs of the students. Why are they being suspended? Are the suspensions being fair, as was mentioned this morning in many different discussions? We have to look at the self-esteem and level of competency and motivation of our students, and to try to value. Students of color, African American students in particular, they appreciate that they can see someone they can emulate, an adult, a staff, or a teacher in front of them that they want to be like. It builds up their self-esteem and their levels of competency and their motivation. This chart that I put together was not for the point of, I never knew I was going to end up doing this, first of all. It was just my record keeping, my way of keeping record of the teachers who applied, and the information of their background information, and were they given interviews or pre-interview or not an interview. How can it be used by the district or any district, if any district has the time and then takes the time to look at who's applying and then keep record of, I'm coming. I didn't know there was going to be a timekeeper. The person was upside down. Almost finished, but it's keeping a record of the measure of districts, in this case, African American staff, and the breakdown of the stages. And then I just met with the superintendent a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about feedback, because applicants want to know, like I didn't get past the pre-interview, what was wrong. I'm not privy to go to the human resources and get that information for them. And I've told them many times, like when I get the calls or email, you call and you ask, because yes, you're right, and they should give you some information back in terms of where you stand or why something didn't happen, especially if you got to the interview stage, and then the next step would be a demo lesson, and you didn't go further than that. So at any rate, basically, there's still more work to be done. I'm looking into and working with some people on trying to develop a broad-based questions of feedback, because I was told there's not a lot that they can give. There's confidentiality in terms of what can be shared with me and or even the applicant, to a certain degree, because if you have a whole committee of people, they write their impressions, you can't know everything. So I'm trying to come up with a way that that these individuals who go for the interviews and who get to that point of an interview, they can at least the Human Resources Office can give a checklist of, well, yes, they were dressed appropriately, yes, their answers were thorough. The new list of openings, I was told, will probably come out by the end of this week, so go on OLAS if you know any people. And then please use my email and contact me if there are any African American individuals that you know of. that might be interested in a position that I can try to push their name through. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to stress that Julia mentioned One Accord, which is an organization that goes out to do training presentations on the disproportionality of minority children. And in one of those PowerPoints, a couple of those PowerPoints, we actually showed the demographics of African American teachers and Hispanic teachers in Westchester County. And I have to tell you that it was really, really alarming to see those numbers, because what we realized is that you can have a child, a student, in his entire school years, from kindergarten to 12th grade, and keep in mind, this is when children establish their identity, who they are. So you could have an African American student throughout his entire years of self-identity never ever see someone that looks like him in a position of leadership and authority within a system as big as their school system. So, I mean, when we saw that, I have to tell you that it was devastating. I mean, it's really devastating. So when you figure that a youth will now come out of high school at 17, 18 years old, and he's created his identity based on the amount of hours that he has spent in this environment for 12 years, and never ever see someone that looks like him, what message do you think he and she are going to receive? All right, so, and that message sort of resonates before they even get to graduation, because I'm sure it has some impact in some of the activities and some of the behaviors. Our kids are angry, okay, and that's very, very clear. And they have their reasons for being angry. But one of the things I like today is the whole guardian equity. Okay, you'll be hearing more about that little concept. I like that. But anyway, I wanted to stress the importance of being able to understand how to increase diversity, because that is a really critical component to the needs of the African American students. So Jackie, I wanted to give her a platform. I wanted, if anyone is interested in joining her in her initiative, she's just started. I think it's an excellent initiative. So thank you so much, Jackie. Okay, so now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Lesibu. Is this your first event after your retirement?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes,
okay, we
I'm very
it.
excited. But let me just say this. Thank you very much. It was a last minute thing that I was invited, so I'm not as prepared as everybody else, but I'm going to speak from the heart.
That's right.
And first of all, I want to say to you that it was an honor to work and be hired as a state education department official reviewing schools. And I must say, in the 24 years, I've reviewed schools, all 5 boroughs. At one time I was assigned to Staten Island, and I've gone up as far as Buffalo. And the same issues exist. And what was really, it was like a bird's eye view, going into classrooms and looking at the diversity, and then examining the materials and the strategies that were used in the classroom. And let me just say, all of the schools, our office in New York City, so Office of School Improvement, and we focus on the low performing schools. The schools that have been identified as not making annual, yearly progress, AYP, those are the schools that we targeted and focused on. And so what we would have to do, I would be a part of a team to go in and some people would say, what a fascinating job. How would you describe your job? I've said that my job is like a school doctor. I'm going in to find out and diagnose what is the problem. And the problem, I think, first of all, is knowing the population. And we do have like a script that we have to use, and they'll have it. They'll have the demographics, they'll have the lesson plans, but they're in folders. They're having in folders. But the schools do not utilize the data and the demographics on a day-to-day consistent basis. So that's why when we go in a classroom, we'll see all these children and we'll look at the books. There may be a few things in the books that relate to the children's racial culture or what language, but except for the bilingual children. The bilingual children, the classrooms, definitely, because they are mandated. That's what they're funded for. But otherwise, you'll go in the classroom and you'll see that there's no effort. And the teacher will say, the principal will say, you know, these kids are coming in, that's why our scores are down. It's because we have these children who are speaking different languages and we don't know how to meet their needs. And that is a major problem. So one of the things that I had the opportunity to be a part of was a statewide multicultural committee. And one of the first things, and this was statewide, where we had people from all the different districts and offices in the State Department come together and say, how can we reflect diversity to improve academic achievement? And the first thing that we said was that we needed to develop a profile, a cultural profile, a multiracial, ethnic, language profile, so that schools could use it on a day-to-day basis, something that is like a handbook of some kind. So we surveyed all of the school districts in New York State, and we came up with a cultural profile, which we then developed staff development. And we went district by district with this profile, talking about the demographics. And one of the major problems that we found was that while we talk about diversity, we'll say we have Hispanic children, we have black children, we lump people together. We really don't know and have an understanding of the diversity. And one of the things that I came up with was developing sort of like not only a district, but a school profile, where the school could take this profile and provide staff development to the teachers, and then develop a resource guide. Because that's one thing teachers say, well, I don't know how to deal with these children because, you know, we don't have materials. But if you have a resource guide where you connect the community, the parents, the students, and the teachers, you can come up. And that's one of the things that I was involved with also with the State University at Purchase, where we had a 2-year project where we came up with a multicultural resource guide for all of the schools. It was early childhood, but it could be done at any level. And a resource guide with even sample activities. Now they, you know, people say, well, we have a core curriculum, but the resource guide is supplementary and it's intended to supplement and support the curriculum. It doesn't have to be in addition of, because I know that teachers say they're put upon, they have deadlines, they don't have any time to do anything special. But if you have your demographics, you have your resource guide, and you know the population that you're serving, you can begin to meet their needs. That's another staff development activity. One of the things that I was involved with for 15 years was developing a New York City early childhood staff development. And I was called into the office in 1994 around this time, and the associate commissioner said, I want a citywide staff development for all staff by November. And so I've never done anything like that. In Westchester County, I used to be director of training of Head Start programs, and I used to do small trainings, but I've never had anything so challenging. And the first thing I did, which was very, very important, I said, well, how do I do it? She says, it's up to you, whatever you want to do, but this is what I want. So I knew I could not do it by myself. So this was the state having their first citywide staff development training for all early childhood staff. So the first thing I did was I went to the New York City Board of Ed at the time. And I went to the early childhood person. And I know that every early childhood program has one staff development day per month. And so I asked them to give us one day out of the year where we could, instead of having your staff development in your center, could we all come together in terms of collaboration with parents invited to come in together and do staff development. And once we were in agreement, and I remember the date, November 4th, 1994, at the Sheraton Hotel. I know every hotel in New York City and which ones could accommodate and which ones could not. And it was the Sheraton Hotel. And once I had the agreement that that would be the one central day, and I'm saying that because it could be done here in Westchester County. And we had all the staff, and it could also be done in a different way in that it could also involve students. We're talking about how do we meet the needs of the students. Why don't we ask them? Why don't we ask the dropouts? Why don't we ask some of the failing students why they don't want to come to school? They play hooky. Why don't we ask them rather than trying to scratch our heads as to what can we do to make those students want to come to school? Now, that's not to say we're giving them control, but we're including them. We talk about the school community, and that includes students and also parents. Now, another strategy that I developed, because I was like, you know, going out to these schools on a daily, weekly basis, sometimes daily basis, and seeing all of this and wondering how I could make a difference. And I decided that I would develop some strategies that because technical assistance was in the realm of my responsibilities. And one of them was developing, it's very simple, and I'm sure, and I've heard it before, oh, we did that. But how, you know, if it doesn't work, then you throw it away. Oh, we already did that and it didn't work. Is a talent bank. You see, often we have parent involvement, but we are always pulling parents in based on their deficits, like what's wrong with them. Some of the parents also are unsuccessful high school dropouts or whatever. So why not identify the strengths of the parents and then have a staff development for staff around just even cultural practices. And I also developed a survey where we asked about cultural practices. You know, some cultures you can't look at an adult, you know, say the child is not paying attention. Maybe that's culturally the way it is, where you are not supposed to look an adult straight in the eye. And so if we could find out from the parents some of those practices and draw them in as partners, equal partners, and say, we value your input and we want your child to succeed. And so I've also developed, and it's amazing, I was at one school, and I'll never forget it, and this one teacher, she never asked a question, and I talked about the talent bank, and then I went back, because I used to go back every week or every other week, and she says, oh, you know what I did? I developed a talent bank. I surveyed all my parents, and now parents didn't come in, but every parent participated in the program. And she found out there was one parent who was unemployed, but he was a carpenter. So she brought him in and he did some woodworking. And what I'm saying, that's in the early childhood. But what if you have a parent who might, you never know what talents they may have that might add to the curriculum. That a carpenter has to measure. If you're teaching measurements, whatever you're doing, match it with the needs and the cultural orientation. And I am just as guilty, but we do lump people together. We say Hispanics. What does that mean? What does that mean? We could talk about the Spaniards in Spain, or you could talk about South Americans, or you could talk about the islanders, Puerto Ricans. And I know I did a workshop, I was asked to do a parent workshop, and I said, parents, I thought they were all Spanish. And, but then I saw some Asian participants, parents, and I said, one of the problems here is that you're not addressing all of the diversity that's here. I said, you have Spanish-speaking parents, but you also have Asians who speak Chinese. And they said, no. We're Chinese, but we come from Cuba and we speak Spanish. So that's an example of stereotyping. Mm-hmm. Now my children, my name Lesibu is South African. I was married to a South African for many years. My children identify themselves as South African Americans. So they're African Americans, but they are South African. Now that doesn't mean that sets them apart. And I was talking to a principal once, and he says, oh, so we have to find resources and identify things that'll match those kids that we have. I said, no, it's two-way. It's for the one child to learn about the other culture and respect. There's mutual respect on both sides. Now, another thing with the talent bank and the resource guide is not only the students and the parents, but staff. We have diversity there also. So what I know we have union issues and, it's going to be too much work in the classroom for me to prepare a lesson plan, but that's what staff development is for. How can we diversify and include and reflect this diversity in our lesson plans? But I think the first key is to identify and know who the population is. Really, really get an understanding. Now, in the early childhood level, there were home visits, so you could really get a sense of who your parents were. But at another level, now I was also at one time a director of higher education opportunity program at the College of Mount St. Vincent, and I had students from all over South America. And I really got to know them on a one-to-one basis. And when I go in to review schools, one of the first things I look at is the interaction between the principal and the students. Is the principal always in the office, or are they in the school? Are they in the classrooms? Do they know their students' names? Are they talking to the parents? Or are they observing in the classroom? Do they really know? So when there are discipline problems, a lot of times it's because, and I've heard children say, he doesn't care about me, she doesn't care about, she doesn't really like us. And it's because they have not connected to the students or the parents as people to people. We're partners and mutual respect and regard. And we have programs, and even in the music. One time I was a substitute teacher in Peekskill, and I was a music teacher, and it was interesting. Now I do have a little musical background. I'm not a musician. I sing in the choir. And okay, I just want to. This is a very good point. Is that the music it didn't reflect anything to children. I mean, it was like going back in the time zone to the 1940s. And the kids were acting up. But I saw a few kids in the back doing break dancing. And I said, all right, you want to break dance? I said, okay, if you sing these songs, 5 minutes at the end of the class, we will form a circle and you can break dance. They sang those songs. But the point I'm making is that I drew them in based on their interest. And staff development can be about strategies for teachers, administrators to draw in students and make them want to come to school. So that's just a little bit, just a tip of
Wow.
Jackie talked about hiring practices as it relates to creating more staff diversity. Dr. Lesibu, thank you. She brought it to the whole concept of cultural competency and being able to utilize that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Shadia, who will be able to talk to us about, of course, ideally, we're just not going to go and hire all African American teachers or, you know, teachers that are more culturally competent. However, there are tools and resources that are available that Shadia is going to speak about that we can use to train our current staff so that they can understand their own biases and prejudices. A lot of times we don't even know that we have them. And this is not just for any one particular ethnic group, all right? We all have biases and stereotypes. So it is very, very important that some type of staff development exists that allows us to pinpoint what they are so that they don't inadvertently play themselves out amongst the students that we're trying to educate. So Shadia is going to talk about one of the training workshops that identifies that. So thank you, Shadia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I just moved to Yonkers, so this is a gift.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. I'm a core trainer. I've been with the Institute since my second year in college. And it has impacted my professional as well as my personal life. So I want to talk a little bit about that work first. The People's Institute for Survival and Beyond is based in New Orleans. And we are a multicultural, multi-generational, national organization of community organizers. The work that we do in that capacity is to go into communities and work with communities to get them to understand what racism is and how it permeates the institutions that we work in every day. So one of the things that you'll see, and as I go forward in talking, is that we consider racism to be the primary barrier to not having equity in this society. Not just equity for, you know, a particular group or ethnicity, but just in general. That because of the way racism has been structured in this society, every other ism has grown out of it. So we spend about 2.5 days analyzing racism, analyzing structures, analyzing the history of it. And the reason a lot of people say, well, why? Why? You know, it's in the past. It's not in the past, it's the problem. And for many of us that are starting to do this equity work, what we don't realize is that because we don't know its history, we end up just creating the same problem all over again, even if we call it a different name. So I want to take a little bit, so I want to walk you through the training a little bit. In the first part of it is what we call the box. And we spend some time thinking about what ideologies are we carrying? What ways of life do we have in our mind that we, when we go into work, don't even think about, don't challenge? What are some of the ideologies and the belief systems that we carry that impact our work? And how do we then analyze them with an anti-racist lens? So for example, for me, I became a principal a couple of years ago. One of the things that I needed to look at deeply was the data. Well, how do I analyze data from an anti-racist lens? How do I not just look at data as a number, but how do I think about not just its impact in terms of disproportionality, but also in terms of the outcomes that I am producing? You know, if the majority of my advanced placement class are all students that, you know, are of a particular group, what does that mean for the rest of the students? So that's some of the work, right? Another piece of it is analyzing the interconnectedness of racism. We believe that institutions and systems are interconnected. You cannot separate education from criminal justice, from healthcare, that you will find disproportionality in every one of those systems. You talk about the media, you talk about transportation, you talk about healthcare, you talk about the Internal Revenue Service. You will find that it creates and permeates disproportionality for particular groups, and that to just say it's a problem in education is not fair. We have to be able to look at the whole picture. So that takes some work. So we take the time during the workshop to take, 3 or 4 particular institutions, depending on what group is in the room, and we start analyzing that based on the knowledge that we have in the room. Because what we find is we don't have to bring the knowledge. Once we ask those questions, the people in the room already know the answers. After that, we go and we spend some time thinking about, well, how do we define racism? If we define it as individual acts of meanness, and we took out every KKK, every mean-spirited person, every bigoted person, everybody in this room that has a problem with X group of people, would systems and structures still create inequality and inequity? Would it still continue? Because I always ask myself, well, wait a minute, somebody was mean to me today at Dunkin' Donuts. Well, guess what? That's not a systemic thing, that's just me and that person. But when you put it into a systemic kind of analysis, then you see that it's much bigger. So yeah, we could take all the KKK, all the mean and all the bigoted people, but we'd still have inequity in our schools. We'd still have a criminal justice system that functions the same way. We'd still have a healthcare system that serves some and not others. So that's the point of the workshop, and that's the work that we do. And then after that, we give, some time, we break into groups depending on whether the training is a regional training, which brings everyone that wants to be a part of it, or whether it's based on an institution or a group of people. We help them analyze their institution. Well, what policies, do you consider to be, part of, your analysis? What concerns do you have about the population that you're serving or about the community that you find yourselves within? And a lot of the times we ask that if you want to do a training or be a part of it, go to a regional, because you'll meet so many people that are doing this work. And it becomes almost a networking opportunity for you to build alliances in the room. And then the last part is the community organizing part. And I remember when I became a principal, I said, oh my God, I can't have another title. Principal, advocate, counselor, what else are you going to give me? And one of the things that I learned in the process is that you can't be effective at this work if you do it alone. So whether you define yourself as a community organizer, whether you define yourself as a principal, whether you define yourself as a, entrepreneur, the reality is that if you're going to do work around equity, you can't do it by yourself. You will get burnt out, you will get tired, and you will be swept away. But if you do it with a group of people, if you build alliances, if you have connections and networks, then you're able to look at the problem from a lot of different angles and to attack it from a lot of different places. The last thing, that I'll say about the training is that the training team we have is a national training team. It represents communities that we have done work in. We don't believe that, hire this group and they'll do the training and, it's a consultation basis. Most of the work that we've done has been because we've been invited to those communities by word of mouth, right? So you get to know someone, you say, hey, I'm doing this work, and then they say, well, I want you to come and work with my tenants in New Orleans, or I want you to come work with, children's services in Houston, Texas. That's the way that we've done the majority of this work. We've done it in all of the states. If you go on the website for the People's Institute, you'll see some of the work that we've done in Houston has been amazing with foster care. Some of the work that we've done in Minneapolis with the healthcare system has really made a difference and an impact. That's what we're looking for. So if you're interested, please go into the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond website. And if you want to look into a Westchester training, there's one coming up in May and another one in June. It would be in the Anti-Racist Alliance. You could just Google Anti-Racist Alliance workshops and you can sign up. Now, what I will say about the impact on my work as a principal. I was fortunate to become a principal a couple of years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago. And the first thing that I did was have my guidance counselors go through the workshop. I had a group of about 3 guidance counselors and about 5 community assistants. I don't know if you have the same thing in the Yonkers system, Westchester system, but my most immediate and pressing need walking into that school was to make sure that my students were graduating. The school already had a strong graduation rate. The problem is that the number of students graduating didn't mirror the number of students entering. Why? Because half of them were being transferred out, and the other group of folks weren't even being paid attention to. So I immediately knew that we had a problem, and I don't even have to go into the ethnicity or the groups that we're talking about, right? But my boys were not making it. So we immediately went into that work knowing that we had to train the guidance team. From there, we knew we had to train some of the parents. And that now that we had a common definition of the problem, we could build models and programs that could assist us in getting the rest of those students forward. I will tell you that at the height of my principalship, we rose the graduation rate to 97%. Our college and career readiness was at 67%. And the reason why was because we trained those students also. And we brought them along and said, okay, well, what do you think? And they came up with, well, Miss, the state wants us to have, I think it was at that point a 55, something to pass the Regents exam, but, we could do better. Oh, really? Okay, well, tell me what you need. And they came up with this 40-40 club. So Jay-Z, the rapper, has the 20-20 club. They wanted the 40-40 club. So we had breakfast for them. We did, a number of little small events. But the reality was that they created their solution to the problem. And that the only reason we were able to get to that solution is because we were able to look at it through an anti-racist lens and say, wait a minute, everything in my training has told me, don't talk to the population. If the answer doesn't come from a book, then it's not valid. I had to flip that script and say, bring my students into a room, let's create a focus group, let's ask you, what do you think is going to motivate you to pass these exams? What do you think is going to motivate your parents to come in to a meeting? At another school that I worked at, New Day Academy, I also trained all of the teaching staff there. And one of the things that I found, just eye-opening was the tension between the curriculum and the books that we use and the populations that we serve. And the students said it themselves when we interviewed the students again. They said, Miss, I don't need every book to have a picture of me in it, but at least I need to have some. Okay, that's a mandate, right? That's a mandate. You can hear it in whatever way that you want, but that's a mandate to say, we need to diversify the resources, the materials, back to your point that we're using. So, and then the last two things that I'll say, because I see my sign, is that I didn't accomplish anything on my own. I had to be really strategic in identifying who the allies were in the community, who were the parents that I could count on to help, both at New Day and then at Collegiate Institute for Math and Science. And along the way, we also built some enemies, right? Because there are folks that are stuck on just doing the job in a particular way. And they will do whatever it takes to maintain it as it should be, right? So I don't want to put it out there that this is necessarily just fun work. This is hard work. And it sometimes can be dangerous work. But it is worthwhile in terms of the quality of life that it provides for ourselves and for the communities that we serve. And the last point, I'll make it, that I'll say is that this analysis has inspired my life because one of the other pieces that it has done for me is that now when I can walk into, whether it be a school building, an institution, anywhere that I go, I am not looking for just a person's title. I'm looking for their humanity. So I had, I'm very proud of the fact that I had 3 of my school aides last year. They started with me as school aides in the lowest possible position at the school, and they graduated last year with graduate degrees from Mercy College as guidance counselors. Because I was not just looking at that community as okay, we gotta fix it, but where's the talent? And what obstacles has gotten in the way of this talent, and how do I now nurture that talent so I can push them forward, because they're going to go to another school and they're going to keep doing this work there too. So it takes a multi-pronged approach. You have to have a common definition. You have to be willing to see how racism permeates everything and is nurtured by every institution that we are a part of, and you have to be willing to say, how do I do this work with self, and then how do I bring it to wherever I am? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Piggyback on top of that, because my background is in child welfare, and of course it's a system, just like education is a system. And I know that undoing racism workshops was widely used throughout child welfare nationally. And I have to tell you, out of my 30-something years in child welfare, it gave me great pleasure to be able to hear social workers talk about how they made different decisions on children being removed from home based on their ability to take this workshop and identify how their own biases played a role in the decisions that they were making. So that started to reduce the amount of African American and minority children that were placed out of their homes, because people were trained, professionals were now trained on what their inner thoughts, biases, perceptions, how that was played out into their everyday profession. So to be able to bring it into the educational system, all right, is clearly a pathway to be able to understand maybe what some of the reactions to the behaviors are. Maybe to get you to understand whether or not the behavior is a reaction to you, or whether or not the child, you know, is dealing with something from a whole different perspective. But based on the fact that educators have the ability to make decisions about disciplinary, suspensions, expulsions, all of these things that have led us to this particular issue now, being able to equip your staff with the knowledge, the skills, and all that comes out of that workshop, it's an incredible 2.5-day workshop, all right? But if you cannot diversify your staff to the needs of a particular school environment, then at least train the ones that you currently have to be able to help them identify how best to respond to the children that they're teaching. So, I just want to thank all of you. I think that your information is critical, and again, the whole purpose of this summit is to be able to offer you tools that you can take back. So, now, we have time for questions? Okay, so let's go into
a tight ship.
I know, right? Let's go into, we have what, 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
Okay, all right, so, questions?
I have a question for Joseph.
Yes.
I think that, you know, you guys have a huge hill to climb as far as trying to identify top talent that can add diversity. And I think that, you know, I must first commend you and say that you've done a pretty good job identifying some of those areas like historical black colleges and black fraternities and sororities, which I do belong to one, so I can appreciate that. My question to you is, how far along are you as far as implementing, let's say, social professional networks in your search? With the transition into social media and stuff like that, you know, a lot of employers have also made that transition and found that it's much more effective as far as targeting that ideal candidate for you. For instance, LinkedIn, you know, some of the information that you specified, you know, black fraternity sororities, historical black colleges, those things are identified on those LinkedIn profiles, and even more information that can give you some more insight on these candidates. Not only can you see what the person looks like and get that information, but you also have access to recommendations and endorsements. So not only will you see who can do the job, but who can do the job well. You also get a look at who their professional connections are, which can give you an idea in determining whether or not that person is a good fit for that particular school or system in that district.
I'll tell you exactly where we are at this particular time. We are at the point where I will use your suggestion. And we'll bring it to the pathways to diversity committee.
Excellent.
And we will move forward with that. Thank you so very much.
That is good. Jack?
You guys are awesome, by the way. And Shadia, I would suggest that you check your car before you leave. Talk about the IRS. Racism in the IRS. We'll talk about that later. As I said, you guys are awesome, and I work with Susan with One Accord, and we have a real problem, not just in Westchester, but in the nation. And I think we really are afraid to talk about it. The fact of the matter is that you folks, the great John Wooden, who was a UCLA basketball coach, he said, "Don't mistake activity for achievement." Okay, you guys are working very hard. We're all working really hard, but we're not achieving what we need to achieve. That is why there is a national movement for black parents to homeschool their children. They are the fastest growing demographic in the nation. Really, I can't doubt them for that. Okay, so I guess, where we're going, I mean, it's great that we have these things in place to stop kids from being suspended and being out of school. That's fantastic. But when they're in school, like you said, there's nothing to teach them about themselves in that school. So why stay? Thank you for bringing me back to school, but now what? And then once they graduate, we have 75% of companies who are in violation of affirmative action laws. So you give me a degree and I can't get a job. So where do we go from here, is the question. There's a lot of work still to be done, but I don't want to romanticize and fall in love with a lot of the individual achievements, because just because one person becomes president doesn't mean we're all doing great. And just because one person gets a couple kids to graduate doesn't mean we do great. We need a national movement together and a collaborative movement together to get everything involved, because we need to show more research on. Jeffrey Canada has a great model. Okay, he goes from 0 to 6. He knows that he has a baby college because he understands that you have to take them from the womb all the way out. Okay, but there's not a lot of people formulating that model or doing that stuff. But I just don't want folks to fall in love, because you guys are the exception. You guys look at what's happening. You're like, this is horrible. What can I do to change it? And you've done it. That's fantastic. But for everyone else, the kids that fall through the crack, what happens to them? I was just a comment. I had to get off my chest. I'm a little hungry.
Actually,
so anybody can respond.
Thank you.
Can I just say briefly, just to say that, but that's also why it's so important to create a culture in the school where students practice advocacy, where they practice what it's like to have to go and defend your mom I had a student that, I had to role play with her because she had to go to eviction court with her mom because the landlord was just being a horrible landlord. It wasn't because, anyway, we can go into a million individual, but part of the thinking that we have to, re-puzzle in our mind, I'm struggling with words here, is we have to think about how do we create classes of students that are graduating who know how to advocate for their communities and know how to do this work. So how do you give a group of students in your school an outline and say, look at the data for our school. This is a math class. Look at the data for our school. What do you as students see in this data? What are the solutions in this data? What do you think we should do about this? Because that practice that they're doing there is going to carry them all the way through their career. But that's part of the culture that we have to create, and we're not used to thinking that way because we're scared that they're then going to challenge us, and they will.
As they should.
As they should. But if they don't practice in the safety of the high school, they'll never be the change makers we need when they get out of there. Never.
Right. Thanks, Shadia.
so
3
actually,
minutes left?
Okay.
okay, so my question is for Shadia as well. Because I think that anti-racism work is a powerful lever in terms of fundamental systemic change in schools, since we're talking about educational institutions. But schools are also culturally places where the adults play nice with each other and don't want to address the issues of systemic racism, particularly if they view themselves as being progressive, if they view themselves as not being racist, but they have racialized outcomes. How do you engage in those types of discussions or unpacking without the anger and resentment that that when you even raise the idea that we need to have discussions about race with adults, there's an open hostility. That's actually, it's an accepted hostility. And how do you kind of pierce through that to get to them actually looking at themselves with an anti-racist lens?
So I can only tell you from my own experience in 2 different schools, and the strategy was completely different. And it was because of the context. So in school A, it's been videotaped, say that my strategy was, it was a new staff, they were young, they were into these issues, right? Okay, we can do a training together. We can actually put this on our professional development calendar, do a training together, and then pull out groups of teachers that will be talking about these issues per grade, right? The flip side of that is being in another school where it's mostly veteran teachers who will not even think about this, and the ones that are not going to talk about it, or only do so in the safety of their classroom. So then you start and you say, okay, well, which teachers can I count on to have this conversation? And how can I start creating groups? And how can I start creating some momentum so that this conversation becomes an informal conversation, even though I'm providing formal opportunities to have. So there's no quick fix to it. That's one of our rules in the workshop. It's depending on your context. And again, I'm going to say to you, Reggie in particular, this is hard work because it's so dangerous because people take it personally.
Yes.
And you have to be able to help people see the difference between, I grew up this way and this is what I believe, to, okay, we want to value what you believe, but some of those beliefs are causing this outcome. So how can we value what you believe in at the same time, question those outcomes and try to change them because our humanity of both is at stake.
That's right.
And that's hard to do, and it's not quick either. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time of getting to know people. Not just their job title, but who are they really? You have this one teacher that's the pickle, man. He does all these Albany trips and he sells pickles. Well, guess what? That's important to that person. That's part of that person's culture.
Right.
So how do you know that? How do you value that? And then how do you use that to have this conversation? So that you can take that pressure and that sting of, I'm a racist. No, that's not what we're talking about. All of us carry some baggage, all of us. So how do we have that conversation?
Wow, thank you very much.
I just want to say that teacher evaluation and teacher effectiveness, I think, has some purpose. Just having that feedback, if parents or even students saying that I don't feel that this teacher likes me because of my race or whatever, I think just getting that feedback and then self-examination in terms of, the principal going over evaluation, but not only that, using that as an assessment tool for planning staff development. That in this school, so many teachers have been identified by students or parents as not being open or friendly or inviting, and therefore we have to have some workshops on it. And then I think teachers then will start to say, no one wants to be identified as a racist, even a racist.
Right.
I mean, no one wants to be. So if you say, look, they think that you're racist, it's like, no, I'm not racist. Why are they saying
Shut
this?
down.
All of a sudden, I think that might be a motivation. It's no easy fix because we know, like the fraternities, what happened this week, these things happen behind closed doors. They come out with a smile, but behind the closed doors, they have a different attitude and a different. Another thing I think might be faith-based coalitions, where it's wrong, it's morally wrong to discriminate and hate someone because of the color of their skin or who they are. And I think that forming coalitions with, it doesn't matter what church or any kind of community affiliation, where, like we have here, of saying that we have to develop strategies, seminars, trainings to try to eradicate it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did you have a question?
I just wanted to, hi, my name is For Real, like, are you for real? I'm a teacher, I'm probation, and I'm in family court. And it just saddens my heart that even today, we're still at the same spot in a sense as where our kids, first of all, don't know who they are. Because like you said, most of their life, they're growing up being taught by people that don't look like them.
So very, very much to back